Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reading Between the Lines. I'm Sarah, and I have the absolute pleasure of being joined today by author and publisher Shawn Speakman. Shawn, how are you?
I'm great, Sarah. Thanks for having me on here. It's a pleasure, and let's have a good chat about books and stuff.
I'm excited. I know that you also went to Comic Con, and I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But first, let me read your bio just so everybody knows who you are. So, Shawn grew up in the very beautiful wilds of Washington State near Mount St. Helens and was surrounded by old growth forests and lakes. And after moving to Seattle to attend University of Washington, he befriended New York Times bestselling fantasy author Terry Brooks and then became his webmaster, which led to a very enchanted life surrounded by words and books and magic. And Shawn was a manager at one of the largest Barnes and Noble booksellers for many years, but he now owns an online bookstore called The Signed Page and the sci-fi and fantasy limited edition publisher Grim Oak Press. I'll link all of these below in our show description so you can check these out. After releasing the best-selling fantasy anthology Unfettered in 2011, he was able to eliminate over $200,000 of accrued medical debt, which we'll talk about later. And he decided to expand Grim Oak Press and continue writing what he loved. So that was fantasy. And in 2023, he partnered with Skybound Entertainment, which is also responsible for The Walking Dead and Invincible, and he published The King Killing Queen. And that's the first book in the Old World Tales trilogy. So, lastly, Shawn is also a two-time cancer survivor. He does live outside of Seattle with his adorable sons and his very vivacious and amazing wife, Kristen, who is my good friend. So, Shawn, tell me about Comic-Con. How was it? What did you do there?
All right, so Emerald City Comic Con is the convention that is nearest to me. I live just outside Seattle, as Sarah said, and so every year it's an absolute must to attend Emerald City Comic Con. Reed Pop, the people that put on the show, do an absolutely wonderful job. It's a convention that draws 80 to 90,000 people, so it's
Oh,
a
wow.
larger convention, but it's filled with celebrities visiting. It's filled with comic book artists and writers, and a lot of different companies sell their wares and merchandise. And it's also a place where authors and artists that work in my particular type of industry aggregate and come together to celebrate what we do.
Right.
And so I own Grim Oak Press, as Sarah said, and it's a specialty publisher that produces we produce fine pieces of art. That are books, but they're pieces of artwork. They are beautiful leather bound, ribbon, high-end materials, usually double signed, fully illustrated. And these are books that are usually fan favorite science fiction fantasy novels that people have come to love over the years. And as the publisher of Grim Oak Press and the creative director that kind of controls what projects we do, I have the ability to pick what I want. And usually they're books that I love because I want them on my shelves with
Right.
as pieces of artwork. So I took Grim Oak Press to Emerald City Comic Con this year with my business partner Jeff and his wife Becky and a couple of our employees, and had an absolutely wonderful time. We sold a con exclusive anthology that featured short stories by attending writers.
Mhm.
In this case, we had 10 short stories by 10 attending writers, and sold that book there, and we sold out the book yesterday, which
Oh,
is
wow.
always fun. But it was a good opportunity for people to grab the book and walk around to find the authors, almost like a treasure hunt, and get the book signed.
Yeah.
I didn't get away from the book very often. I had one panel this weekend, which usually I have 3 or 4, but
That you moderate?
I did. I moderated a wonderful panel about the necessary need for cozy reads.
Oh, gosh. Oh,
And
my gosh.
it was wonderful. I had authors T.J. Klune, Travis Baldry, and Annalee Newitz, who are friends of mine, but also incredible writers. All three of them are New York Times bestselling writers, and
Oh
so we
yeah,
had a lot of
absolutely.
fun sitting up talking about the importance of cozy reads and even how they go about reading cozy reads. So, a convention is just filled with a lot of diversity and fun, and everybody has a smile on their face. And, I am hoarse today. And you are hearing a voice that is not mine, but it is one that is super pleased by the convention and how well it went. So
That's incredible. Oh my gosh, I wish I'd been. That sounds so cool. Um, wow. Okay, I have
highly,
many
I
questions about.
highly, I highly recommend to people, if you can go to a convention of something like this, do it at least once,
I guess
because
I didn't realize how many authors actually are going to this and also book publishers as well. I thought it was, I mean, obviously it's comics and those are books and published, but still I thought it was more getting to be so like celebrity based or like I just think of Marvel comics, I mean, and just all that sort of thing. But there are fictional authors there as well.
yeah, the original Comic Con was in just outside San Diego, if I remember right, back in the
Mhm.
70s, and it was largely comic books and comic book artists, but oddly enough, it was kind of put together by a science fiction writer named Greg Bear,
Right.
um, and so Comic Cons then began to flourish, and then J.K. Rowling wrote, Harry Potter, and then George R. R. Martin came along and wrote Game of Thrones, and all of a sudden,
These
around
cult
the
followings
the
developed.
2000s, cult following, like being a geek and a nerd no longer was in the shadows; it was out
Yeah.
and about, and it's become the 800-pound gorilla in publishing. And so then Hollywood got a piece of that,
Oh
obviously.
yeah.
So, all of a sudden Comic Cons took over, became this extra thing where celebrities could come to these things, and they were celebrities too. And so it was the writers became the celebrities because they were the ones originally producing the content. And all of a sudden there was this kind of explosion and amalgamation of Hollywood and writers coming together in one spot. And so now the celebrities bring in the people. Now those people are looking at what the writers are doing and buying books, and publishers are being
Right.
very smart about it, giving away books at these things to get people reading the works, and people like me get to bring our companies and show off what we do. And it's become it's become its own zeitgeist almost.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of fun. So yeah.
I'm also really looking forward to being able to purchase some limited edition books from Grim Oak Press because my stepson is a huge fantasy fan, and also he's a book collector and he loves these beautiful editions. So I'm very excited to pick up a few for him. Um,
Excellent.
I'm going to switch topics here just a little bit and kind of go back to the beginning to talk
Yeah.
a bit about you are a cancer survivor and you
I-
also were a childhood cancer survivor. Can you just share a little bit with us about that?
yes, absolutely. Yeah, the childhood aspect of it. I was a child. I was 25. I still felt like at 25 I was a child.
Okay. Okay.
Looking back on it, I go, oh my gosh, that kid was somebody completely different. Yes, when I was 25 in 2001, I was diagnosed with a non-Hodgkin's Burkitt's-like lymphoma that was in my small intestine, and a very aggressive cancer. Not one you want. If you're going to have cancer, it's not one you want. I had a 38% chance of curability over 5 years. And fortunately, I lived in Seattle at the time, which is a hotbed for cancer research and cancer care. And
Mhm.
I was fortunate that I ended up at Virginia Mason, which is one of the better institutes for this, and had a wonderful oncologist named Dr. Malpass, and his team. They were wonderful, and he decided early on with this thing that he was going to throw the kitchen sink at it and kill it.
Oh yeah.
So upon diagnosis, I had surgery, pretty major surgery, to remove as much of it as they possibly could, and then went on to have chemo every day for 3 months. And it was I don't want to say it was a godsend, because that's not what you think about when you get cancer, but
Yeah.
I was very fortunate in where I was at. A lot of people aren't lucky enough to be in a city like Seattle with that kind of care, and we killed it. And so at the time, I was working for Barnes and Noble. I was a manager at Barnes and Noble, as well as finishing my schooling at the University of Washington. And it put my life on hold for a good solid 6 months. It really knocked me down, gave me an appreciation for life I don't think I had before that. And at the time, I was working with best-selling author Terry Brooks. I'd only been working with him for about a year and a half when I was diagnosed. And so him and his wife Judine had been touched by cancer before. They understood what that meant. And we became very close-knit over that time.
Yeah.
And so, I beat the cancer. I kind of decided that being a doctor was not for me. I was originally going to school to be a doctor, and I was working on a biochemistry degree. And I kind of decided, you know what, I don't want to be in debt for another 10 years after this with, medical, with the debt that's accrued from just going to medical
and
school
debt.
Yeah, I didn't school debt. I did not want that. So I switched gears. I went to a writing conference. Terry took me to a writing conference in 2003. And he had read some of my work, and he said, you have what it takes. You just need to hone it. And so I went to the Maui Writers Conference in 2003 and had a great tutelage by an author named Stephen Barnes, who's currently writing Star Wars novels. Mm-hmm. And was very fortunate in having his tutelage, because his tutelage really came down to, you can be a really great writer, but if you don't have self-care in your life, then you have nothing. And so coming out of cancer treatment, the self-care part really resonated with me, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And I decided to try my hand at writing. And so I stayed at Barnes & Noble for another couple of years after that, working and building the signed page. And when the signed page got to a part where I felt comfortable enough that I was making enough money to survive on my own, that's when I really started writing and developing my writing a great deal. So that first cancer in 2001, the silver lining of that was it made me want to chase my dream. Take the educated risk, take the calculated risk, and try it out.
Yeah.
And then fast forward 10 years. So where I had cancer again.
When you tell me about the book, tell me about Unfettered, and when did that happen? Was that the first time that you had cancer, or the second time that you had cancer?
During the first time, when I was 25 in 2001, when I had the first cancer, I had medical coverage because I was working for Barnes & Noble. So
got it.
And at the time, and which is still true now to this day, Barnes & Noble, when something like this happens with one of their members, they really do a good job of taking care of you. And so I had health insurance then. And but the unfortunate side effect of that was I worked for Barnes & Noble for another 5 years after that. And after 5 years, I thought to myself, well, the cancer's not coming back. It was really aggressive. My oncologist told me if it didn't come back within, a couple months,
you were in the clear.
We got it. And that was always the plan, to hit it hard and kill it. And it did.
Yeah.
But during that time, I had a number of PET scans, which are scans that are like CT scans, but they have a radioactive sugar attached to it. And that's what helps them kind of find the cancer in your body earlier. Okay.
Yeah.
And since then, they've kind of discovered that the radioactive sugar aspect of a PET scan can result in, this is funny to say, but a garden variety Hodgkin's cancer.
Okay.
Hodgkin's is the first cancer that was discovered. We know the most about it. We know the best way to counter it. But after 5 years, I had left Barnes & Noble and discovered that I couldn't get health insurance because of my pre-existing condition. The first cancer, health insurers considered it a pre-existing condition. And I was roundly rejected by, at the time, I want to say there was 5 insurers in Washington State. 3 of them outright said no to me. 2 of them, my monthly my monthly premium was over $2,000, which at the time I was making probably $3,200.
Right.
So I
That's
simply
impossible.
could not afford health insurance. I was one of those people in American health insurance where I fell through the cracks.
Yeah.
And so, but I was chasing the American dream, right? Like I was doing what a lot of Americans want to do, which is try their hand at chasing their dream. And so, unfortunately, I was one of the ones that got nailed with that because I didn't
Yeah.
have health insurance. I couldn't get health insurance, and yeah, in 2011, I was diagnosed with the Hodgkin's. And at that point, I hadn't had insurance for 3 or 4 years. I wanted to say, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 times during that time, I tried to get it and couldn't get it.
Right.
So of course, I get this Hodgkin's, which also included a surgery here on my neck to remove what was a pretty large tumor. It was stage 4. It was all over my chest. And so all of a sudden I was right back in it again. I was fortunate enough to be able to work with Dr. Malpass again. So I had somebody that I trusted. He was still at Virginia Mason. The nurses were absolutely wonderful. I'm still friends with 3 or 4 of them to this day. They're really the ones that saved me on the second one because they brought the levity and the joy of life. I was really upset during the second one. I'd already had it once. Why am I getting a different one? This isn't fair. All those questions popped up. And not only that, but I was being inundated with medical debt. You know, you have a surgery, you have 6 months of chemo in this case to kill this particular one. And all of a sudden I had a debt that was over $200,000. And I really didn't have a choice other than declaring medical debt, which would have hurt me financially in my future buying a house and whatnot.
Sure.
So I decided to fight the medical debt. And at the time, I was really lucky in that I had already been working with Terry for over 10 years at this point. I'd met a lot of New York Times bestselling writers. And Terry told me, look, you know a lot of people. I'll give you a short story to keep the bill collectors at bay. But you really should reach out to your friends because they will help you with this. And he was right. So I reached out to a number of different writers. The first one is Patrick Rothfuss, who is a mega bestseller on par with George R. R. Martin. I reached out to my friend Jacqueline Carey and friends Naomi Novik. And all of a sudden,
oh gosh, I love Naomi. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and Naomi and I have known each other a really long time, and so I reached out to the people that I knew, and it became this wonderful contributor list of best-selling writers that all came to my aid. They donated short stories, and I collected those short stories, and that book became Unfettered. Unfettered meaning not being chained down, to be free, right? And so not only was I trying to be free of the cancer that I was, fighting, but also of the medical debt. And I sold that book. It sold exceedingly well. It, along with my first book, The Dark Thorn, together those 2 books countered the medical debt. I got that debt done. And that's what really was the beginning of Grim Oak. Grim Oak grew out of that silver lining of darkness in my life at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got chills. That's really amazing. I would really encourage anyone who is a huge fantasy lover to check out Unfettered if they haven't already. I'll link to that. And I didn't realize about Naomi also contributing, and I'm a really huge fan of her. So now I'm going to pick that up and read it. And I appreciate you sharing about that. My cousin Camille died when she was 21 from colorectal cancer. And it was hard to watch, being diagnosed, at 19 and seeing all of a sudden that spark of being more interested in living and thriving when she had such limited time. So it was hard to watch, but okay. Let's talk about happier things, which would be, I wanted to talk about any currently your new projects that you're working on, currently what you're working on in terms of writing. So let's go there.
Yeah, sure. I'll finish up one thought that I want.
Oh, please. Yeah.
Grim Oak too, because originally Grim Oak was not going to continue. after I finished off that medical debt, I
Yeah.
had no intention of opening a publishing press. Grim Oak was a way to kind of focus, the money into an entity that, would allow me to eliminate that debt. But I wanted to go back to write. I felt very strongly that I was onto something with my own writing, and that's really what I want to do. My mom liked to say that I was a born liar. And she's like, there's three things that you can do. You can be a lawyer, a politician, or a writer, a fiction writer. And so I think I chose the right one, personally.
Yeah.
But it was best-selling author Brandon Sanderson, who I was meeting with Brandon, and Brandon asked me, what's next? You've beaten your cancer, you've beaten your debt. What's next for Grim Oak Press? And I told him nothing. Like, I'm hanging it up. I don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
And Brandon, for those of you who are Brandon Sanderson fans, he has become the face of our genre now.
For sure.
The man writes a couple books a year. He broke Kickstarter one day when he raised $58 million in a single day, that sort of thing, for his own work. He's been on CBS News and CNN and all these different places. And so, but before all of that, he was the business savvy one that said, Shawn, you've been given a platform. You have to use it. So the other anthologies that we've done since then in the Unfettered series have all been geared towards eliminating medical debt for other writers. So, which has been, my way of being able to give back to what happened with me, to give back to the other community, the rest of the community that needs it. The Affordable Care Act, when it was passed, really helped a lot of writers. And so the need for it hasn't been as much as it was when I needed it. But but the great thing about what we're doing with Grim Oak is, and the Unfettered anthologies is, dental work is largely not covered in these insurance plans. We have paid more than $75,000 in dental debt. Dental bills. Yeah, because most people don't get dental. And then all of a sudden they have to have a tooth pulled or get a root canal. And it's not cheap for that stuff. Right. So oddly enough, that we've become like the dental covering for a lot of writers, which is great. Yeah. And then of course from that, Grim Oak, I've gotten a lot of I've gotten a lot of readers from it. And so I've managed to put out my own work, which now leads into your initial question here about talking about my own work and whatnot. I've been very fortunate in having a great mentor in Terry Brooks. I'm very Brooksian in my approach to writing. I write every single day. If I don't write every day, I kind of, Kristen can attest to this, I get a little annoying, a little curmudgeon-y, a little grouchy. I've produced a lot of work, and especially in the last couple of years, which has been a lot of fun. I wrote a book that in my industry is called a trunk book. It's a book that stays in a trunk. It's never shown. I've shown it because people were interested in it. So I would not consider Song of the Fellhammer my best work. Yeah, I'm proud of it, but not in the same way. The Dark Thorn I published about 10 years ago, and it began the series of books that I'm working in still to this day. And it's the reason why I wake up in the morning, because it's a series that I want to see finished. So
I wanted to ask about because you write a lot of, like, part of your you have a Patreon, and one of the benefits to that is that you have short stories that you're dropping. I think it's monthly. Yeah. Are these like chapters or parts of some of these like upcoming or forthcoming titles, or are they separate?
Yeah, Patreon. The great thing about Patreon, I highly encourage anybody to follow my Patreon, because I feel like the lowest tier in the Patreon to become a member is $3 a month. Yeah. So that's less than a cup of Starbucks coffee. Like, it is. And you get at least a 3,000 word story every month. The problem with me is that my short stories tend not to be short. So lately those stories have been actually 11,000 words or 12,000 words. So it's almost like you're getting 4 times the value for the $3. Like I'm really horrible with that, but
And we need to raise those prices, but we'll talk about that later. Okay.
yeah. But there are different membership tiers, and so the low tier you get the short story for a month, but then the next tier after that, you get to see like an early chapter from my next book that I'm working on, and so it leaves it up to the reader to decide how they want to support the Patreon and what they want out of it. And so right now the sequel to The Dark Thorn is I'm almost done with it. I only have a couple chapters left to write in it.
That's the Everwinter Wraith.
The Everwinter Wraith, yeah. Say that 5 times fast.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a mouthful, but
yeah, the Everwinter Wraith. And so I've revealed over the last year or so, I've revealed the first 12 or 13 chapters of that, which has been a lot of fun because, I'm really not one that likes my work out there early, but I feel confident enough in this particular book that I don't think it's going to change a whole lot upon editing. And so
that's what I wanted to ask is like when you put stuff out kind of like a pre-release or you have like beta readers or whatever it may be, how much of their input then changes what you've put out? Like, do you go back and edit more or add to it, or do you just leave it as is?
I ignore.
Good.
My report card, growing up said does not play well with others, and so
fair. Okay.
Which wasn't true, but and it's a joke. I like making that joke. First time I heard that joke was Terry. So I attribute that to him, but no, I'm not a writer who enjoys being in a writer's group. I don't like showing my stuff off early. Best-selling writer Robin Hobb and her daughter, sometimes they will get a glimpse at a short story that I'm working on or that I've finished. I don't show it as I'm writing it. Because mostly my process is I write the first draft and I feel pretty good about it. And I take 2 weeks off or so I leave it behind. And then after 2 weeks, I come back and I look at it again with a new set of eyes and I do my second draft. And I always feel very strongly that my second draft is actually a really good draft. And so I'm not frozen or paralyzed like the majority of writers. I feel like they're paralyzed by that part of the process, and I'm not. Yeah. It's just every writer is built differently.
Yes.
There are writers who shop when they finish a chapter, it goes to their writers group, and then they work it together as a group.
Yeah.
And I found I just don't work that way. I want the entire book written. And then at which point I do my second draft. Like I said, I take a couple of weeks off and I come back to it. I look at it again and I fix what I notice. And then I send it to my editor.
Yeah.
And my editor is Betsy Mitchell, who is a former editor-in-chief at Penguin Random House, which is the largest publisher in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so Betsy knows what she's doing. And I implicitly trust her.
Yeah.
And even though sometimes the editorial letters I get back to her mention something that I'm not happy about, I do the work and I fix it.
Okay.
Because she's right. I lean on the expert.
Yeah.
So with the Patreon,
I love that.
I don't have that. With the Patreon, I don't have her there. So it's me putting out really my work. And then a lot of these stories, especially now with what I'm working on my Patreon right now, I'm writing a series of short stories that have the same character in them.
Yes.
And so I'm writing about this knight who really honestly should not be a knight. He's too short. He's too small. He just he has a big heart, but he doesn't have what it takes to be a knight. Like, he was a cook's assistant. He was not supposed to be a knight. He falls into being a knight. And his best friend, who should be a knight, is his squire. And it makes it this fun conflict between them and their childhood friends. So they got all the funny jokes between one another and whatnot. And so over this year, I will be writing those short stories every month or every month and a half and delivering those. And then at the end, they will be gathered together into a collection of the wayward paths of Sir Bevelor.
I can't wait.
Which is actually set in a novella that I'm writing that I will end up publishing also.
let me ask about world building then, because
Yeah,
like Brandon Sanderson, of course, everything that he writes, it seems to be all within the same universe. That's not even a world, it's a universe.
yeah, Cosmere.
Um, Cosmere, thank you. And in your case, do you find that your short stories or your series, are they all within the same world or are they
God,
different?
it's so funny. Before Brandon started doing this, that was always my plan.
Yeah.
So he beat me to it. And it's something whenever I see him, I'm like, how's my world going that you stole from me almost,
Hmm.
No, had no intention of writing the Cosmere at all. Like, no, that's purely Brandon. Oddly enough, Stephen King did it first. And
That's true.
there might be somebody before that did it even before King did it, but the Dark Tower series really has tendrils throughout 20 novels or so that Stephen King has written. You find elements of The Stand in the Dark Tower. You see elements of Insomnia in the Dark Tower. You see elements of Salem's Lot in the Dark Tower. So
Wow.
really, King did it first, and I'm a huge Stephen King fan. I think in 100 years, people aren't going to be talking about his horror. They're going to be talking about the Dark Tower. And
Agreed.
so a big part of my writer DNA is in Roland and in the Dark Tower. And so because of that, I kind of wanted to emulate that a little bit. I wrote the Dark Thorn, and it's set in our real world, so it was easy for me to pull things in.
Right.
And then I wrote the Tempered Steel of Antiquity Grey, which is a kind of a science fantasy Star Warsian meets Dune
Yeah.
kind of novel.
Yes.
And I realized I was about halfway through writing it, and I realized it's the far future of the Dark Thorn. And so all of a sudden, these elements started creeping in from the Dark Thorn.
I love that.
Small little things that you can read them separately. You don't need to read them together, but there's little elements that sneak in.
I love
And
that.
I've had I'd say probably about 20 or 30 people write me an email and say, you used this word over here in this science fiction book. And you
Use it on
use the same
purpose.
word over
Yeah.
here in the Dark Thorn. Are they attached? And my answer is always the same. What do you think?
Oh God. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not going to answer that question, but there's a part of me that's kind of like, yeah, they kind of are attached. And then of course the King Killing Queen is very much set in the same universe as the Dark Thorn. I can unequivocally say that. And
Okay.
the King Killing Queen is set in Europe, I would say 4 or 5 centuries ago. And
Okay.
there are literal story plot points that are happening in the King Killing Queen, and a specific character that's introduced at the end of the novel that is one from the Dark Thorn. So they're definitely connected. I can't even say what do you think, because they are connected. And so my plan is to finish the Everwinter Wraith and publish that,
Yeah.
because I promised that for a long time. And then I'm going back to the King Killing Queen timeline and finishing the 2 books in that trilogy, because those
Okay.
3 books really lead into the Dark Thorn's 3rd book, which is the Splintered King. And that book will be it'll be the ultimate coming together of 2 series into one book, where the stakes are really high. And hopefully, if I've done my job correctly, it'll make for one really, really good read.
Oh, I'm excited. I also love that on your site. I think it's under the books page, because you do have a lot of different works in progress or published. But
Yeah.
I like that you kind of broke it out into 3 categories. Like, start here. If you like urban fantasy, then the Dark Thorn. If you like high fantasy, you want the King Killing Queen. And then if you like Star Wars, and who doesn't, then you want the Tempered Steel of Antiquity Grey, which
Yeah,
is
I get that
nice. So
question a
then,
lot. Where should I start? And so that was
yeah,
I had to invest a little bit of time, into breaking that out and figuring out the best way to lead people, because not all readers like the same stuff, right?
that's true.
Um, yeah, I mean, I like an occasional, romantasy every once in a while, and I love a cozy book like Legends and Lattes, but sometimes I pick up Stephen King's new book, and you know what, I like that.
Yeah.
Everybody has a different taste at a different time, and so I felt like it was important to break them out in a way that made sense, that I could kind of come down to a common denominator. And then almost all of my short stories, almost all of them, are set in that Dark Thorn, King Killing Queen timeline at some point. So I've
So
had a lot of
even
people ask me where those are set and the best way to read those. So I think I set that up on my website too.
and then even the short story one with the knight and the squire who are friends. That
Yeah.
he was okay.
So I'm writing. I'm writing. This is kind of a fun story. I last year I was at Rose City Comic Con with Terry and authors Robin Ha, Peter V. Brett, and Kat Ogden, and we were having dinner, and I asked Pete what he was working on, and I knew that he was kind of wrapping up a trilogy of his own, but I knew he was close to ending it. So kind of what comes next for Pete? And he said, I am so burned out writing what I'm currently under contract to do. I want to write something for me. And so he's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to write something fun, like something that, we were leading up to the election, and no matter how you lean politically, like elections always induce some kind of stress in people.
100%.
And he's like, I just need to write something for me that's fun. And I was on the cusp of writing something really dark because I was a completely separate project that I've had in my head for 15 years.
Yeah.
And I was on the verge of doing that. And I just kind of realized, I don't need more grim in my life. There's enough there already. So let's do something different. And so I started writing a novella it could be set right after the events of the King killing Queen in Europe.
Okay.
It could be. The map for it could be set in one of the major valleys that are in Europe. Like it would work. It features the Fae and the Earl King and the Morrigan, and it features these characters that are already in the Darkthorn and already in the King killing Queen. So I thought to myself, but it's kind of fun and uplifting, and the language is very Rothfussian. Like I am almost like trying to channel as much of Pat as I can into this work, which makes it a longer write for me because I don't naturally write in this beautiful prose. I write in more of a Brandon Sanderson commercial. Let's get the story out. Let's create a cool magic system and do it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's taken me a little longer to write Wormbane. That's the name of the book. It's called Wormbane. Cool. And I've written, because it's a novella, you can only write 40,000 words before it becomes a novel. And I want to keep it a novella. So I know I have 40,000 words to play with. So I've written 23%. I know, I literally know, and I'm hoping I don't go over the 40,000. If I do, I'm going to have fun really editing it down. But
that's hard.
So Wormbane is kind of set in between the two series. It could be. I'm not sure if I'm going to tie it together yet or not.
Okay.
And the Wayward Paths of Sir Bevelor, the short stories that I'm writing for my Patreon, are set in that universe. Actually, with a cool framing system, I've actually put, I'm not supposed to say this, but I put Terry Brooks in as a character, and it's very Terry. He's a master librarian in this world. Of course. And it's him.
That's so cool.
Him reading fictional stories to a woman. You don't know who she is. It's very kind of notebooky almost, where you don't know who this woman is and their relationship and why they're together and why he's reading to her. And these stories, are they true? Are they works of fiction? Like, you don't know. Yeah. And so I'm having a lot of fun writing those short stories, and they're helping inform my writing of Wormbane. So it's this back and forth every month. I get to write in both. Yeah. Which I find invigorating.
Very cool. I'm so excited. I can't wait. And now that I have that little inside information about Terry and as the librarian, I'm very looking forward to reading that.
Excellent.
Well, tell me how we can support you and how, of course, we can find you. I guess Patreon would be the best way. But
yeah, I love the Patreon because it's a community of my readers, and they're all in one spot, and they like to talk with one another back and forth. And so the Patreon is an easy way. I initially started the Patreon because I needed a new car. This is I love it. This is one of those funny things where I can tell
real talk. Yeah.
This is real talk. This is life, writers. Why do you write? Oh, you love because you write, because you have to do this. But no, we have mortgages. Like, we have to
It's
pay
true.
the bills.
We got kids. Yeah.
Yeah, and my 2008 Honda Element was starting to die, and I love my Ellie. But I needed a new car. And Kristen said, well, you've been looking at a new car for a while. And I said, yes, I want this car over here really badly. And it had a price tag on it. And it was a Rivian. I really wanted an electric car finally. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I put this amount of money down, the payments are still this payment.
Yeah.
Like, it's still a big payment. I don't want to do that. And Kristen, to her benefit, said, well, why don't you start a Patreon or something? And I was
She's
like,
so
okay.
smart.
Yeah. So I said, sure, let's do it. And then actually celebrated a couple months ago because I hit that amount that I owe every month for my Rivian. So
That's
so
incredible.
I love the Patreon because it allows somebody to, with minimal money, read my work, right? And I think the work's good, and I think it's a lot of fun. And so I think the Patreon's a good way to do that. Grim Oak Press has my books, so grimoakpress.com has The King Killing Queen, and that's a really good place to start. Because I wrote The Dark Thorn so long ago, and it was not professionally edited. It was written before I had Betsy Mitchell as my editor. Mm-hmm. I had Betsy edit it last year, and so what's kind of termed the author's preferred edition is coming out this summer. So I would tell your listeners to maybe wait for The Dark Thorn for that version, because that's going to be the better version. But The King Killing Queen is on Grim Oak Press, and that's a perfect place to start. And then you can see what we do at Grim Oak Press too.
I think that is a fabulous thing to do. People really should be checking out Grim Oak Press.
I sold a lot of The King Killing Queen this weekend at Emerald City Comic Con. I signed dozens and dozens of books to people that were excited. So I'm hot off of that convention and talking about The King Killing Queen.
I love it. We didn't really talk about the signed page. Do you want to just give us a quick synopsis of that?
Yeah, the signed page is actually a lot of fun to talk about because it predates Terry. So much of my career has been around Terry and his work because I've been his longtime webmaster.
Yeah.
And but there actually was a time period before Terry came around that I was doing my own things. And when I moved to Seattle to attend the University of Washington in 1996, I started a dedication website to Terry Brooks, and that's kind of how things started. But because of that, I had a lot of his readers ask me, like, well, you're in Seattle and Terry's in Seattle and doing all of these events. Can you get a book signed for me? And my light bulb went off, and I said, oh, there's a need for this. This is for sure. There's a need for, and it didn't exist. Like, Amazon barely existed during that time period. Like, I was literally, I'd say, a year and a half away from being Jeff Bezos.
Oh yeah.
I really was. I was already leveraging the internet to sell books before anybody was doing it. And if I had just been a year and a half earlier, I probably would have had a garage shipping out books like he did. Like I was doing that within a year and a half. So it's kind of fun for me to sit back and go, oh, we're both bald. My wife's hotter than his wife right now, but
that's true. She is.
Whatever. But so I started the signed page, and it was in 1999. And the first couple signings, like, I think Terry signed 3 books for Angel Fire East, and Tad Williams signed 3 books of Mountains of Black Glass, and it grew really quickly. Within 5 years, I could quit my job at Barnes and Noble, and I've because all of a sudden publicists saw what I was doing in New York City. They saw what I was doing, and Seattle's a hotbed for readers. And it's a hotbed for where they send authors on tour. So I was able to meet a lot of these people over that time period from 1999 until I got that second cancer in 2011. I had met a lot of writers and befriended them, like-minded people. Writers gravitate to one another. It's kind of fun.
True.
That's interesting. And so, I've had the signed page now for 25 years. It's really hard for me to say that out loud, but it's true. I had a signing. Terry signed 700 books last week. That when we finish with our podcast today, that's what I have to go to the warehouse and begin shipping those books out. So today is not a writing day; it is a shipping day.
Yeah.
Matt Dinneman, who is right now before our very eyes blowing up into the next big thing with his Dungeon Crawler Carl series. Matt and I are friends. We've been friends for a while, and he signed 800 copies of his book last week. So I have 1,500 books that I have to ship out over the course of the next 2 weeks. And I enjoy doing it because I'm helping these people who can't see the authors on tour get a signed or personalized book. And there's nothing like a person receiving a signed book and being so thrilled with it. And me getting that feedback back, it is rejuvenating. It means a lot. It does. It means a lot. And so I doubt I'll ever stop the sign page. It does very well. I mean, I call it my vacation money, but
I'm like crushed right now because I just bought from Barnes and Noble the Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher.
Oh yeah, and you're seeing edges. It on the
website. And you have this one signed with the book plate.
That one's signed by book plate. I've known Ursula Byrne and T. Kingfisher for a while. She's wonderful. Actually Wormbane. I'll tell you a quick story about that. Wormbane. When I started thinking about the novella and the fun that I wanted to have with it, I immediately thought of two things: The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle, and Thornhedge by
love Thornhedge. Yep.
Right, and those two books are so wonderful. I highly recommend any of your listeners out there to read those two books because they're really, really good books. I'm trying to achieve what they achieved with Wormbane.
Yeah.
Oh. So I'm lucky to have her on the sign page now too. She's wonderful. She just finished treating cancer too, and so her and I talked a lot last year about that, and we went back and forth. I was wishing her a lot of well wishes and checking in on her.
Put in a good word with her. I'm talking to her. She has a team. I'm talking to her team and trying to get her on sooner or later. But
send me an email, Sarah, and I will forward it to her, and we'll go around those other people.
Just let them know that I'm super nice. Anyway,
I will. Okay. I'll tell them the truth.
Okay, thank you. Well, Shawn, I really appreciate you being here today. This was so much fun, and I would love to have you back again sooner than later so that we can keep chatting because I think there's so much more we can talk about. But especially as soon as you have as soon as you've finished, it's the Everwinter Wraith.
Yeah, Everwinter Wraith is the next one I will have finished. Yep.
Keep me posted because then I'd love to have you back on. We can talk more about Darkthorn and in more detail. So
excellent. I would love that, Sarah. This has been a lovely time with you. I always love talking to a real book lover. Thank you.
I appreciate you so much. I learned a lot today. So hang on just a second. I'll end this, but let me keep chatting with you. All right, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was really, really fun. Shawn, thank you again.
No, thank you. And hi, everyone. Bye.
Take care.